Somewhere between the jagged limestone ridges and the endless scrubland, where the wind carried dust instead of rain, a man found something he wasn't looking for. The heat was a physical weight that afternoon. It pressed down on the canyon floor, turning the air into a shimmering curtain of distortion. Silas Kincaid wiped sweat from his eyes with a dirty sleeve and walked toward the mechanical water pump. The leather of his boots creaked, a dry sound in a dry land. He saw her collapsed against the stone trough. She was young, but death hovered close. She was taller than any woman he had ever seen, her limbs long and powerful, though now they lay slack in the dust. Her dark hair was matted with red clay and dried blood. She did not wear the calico of a settler, but the painted deerskin and hammered silver of the Comanche, the lords of the plains. Silas stopped. His hand hovered near the Colt revolver at his hip. In this territory, mercy was often a trap. But when he looked closer, he saw her lips were cracked white. She was alone. He pumped the handle. The water groaned up from the deep earth, cold and clear. He filled a ladle and knelt beside her. "Here," he rasped. His voice sounded rusty from disuse. She opened her eyes. They were obsidian black, filled with a terrifying intelligence. There was no gratitude in them, only suspicion. She looked at the water, then at him, calculating the cost. But thirst won. She drank. 3 times she drained the ladle, and when she was done, she didn't collapse back down. She stood up. She rose like a statue being unveiled, towering over him, regaining her dignity in a single breath. She stared at his face, memorizing the scar on his cheek, the color of his eyes. Then she turned and walked toward the Red Rock Hills. She didn't look back. She didn't say a word. She simply vanished into the heat shimmer. Silas watched her go, thinking that would be the end of it. He was a fool. Silas Kincaid had lived on this hard land long enough to know that the silence of the desert is never empty. It is a waiting thing. The ranch sat in a shallow valley, isolated by steep cliffs. Silas had chosen this place for the silence. No questions, no past. Just wild cattle, a few mustangs, and the kind of solitude that let a man forget the sins he had committed back east. That evening, the air changed. The crickets stopped singing. The wind howled through the gaps in the log cabin, sounding like whispering voices. Silas slept with his rifle across his chest. When the sun rose, painting the sky in pale violet and brutal white, Silas stepped out onto his porch. He adjusted his suspenders, squinting against the glare. He looked up at the ridgeline, and his heart stopped. At first he thought they were shadows, but shadows do not sit on horseback in perfect stillness against the morning sky. He counted 10, then 30. Then he stopped counting. They lined the northern ridge, the eastern slope, and the western ravine. Everywhere he looked, there were Comanche warriors on painted war ponies. Their iron-tipped spears caught the light. They were not advancing. They were not screaming. They were simply there, surrounding his ranch like a noose pulled tight around a condemned man's neck. Silas's hand moved toward the Henry rifle leaning against the doorframe, but he stopped himself. What good would one rifle do against a nation? This wasn't a raid. A raid was chaos, fire, and speed. This was a judgment. Movement caught his eye. A single rider broke from the group on the northern ridge. He descended the rocky slope with a terrifying, controlled grace. The horse was a massive black stallion, darker than a nightmare. The man riding it exuded an authority that made the air feel heavy. He stopped 50 yards from the porch. His face was a map of old wars, deep lines cut by sun and sorrow. He wore no feathered headdress, only a single black eagle feather braided into his gray hair. Silas didn't move. He didn't run. He just stood there, waiting to die. The old warrior raised a hand. He pointed, not at Silas but at the water pump. He made a gesture. drinking. Silas swallowed hard. Yes, he whispered to the wind. I gave her water. The warrior shouted something in his own tongue, a harsh guttural sound that echoed off the canyon walls. The ranks on the hills parted, and through the gap she appeared. The girl from yesterday. But she was transformed. The blood and dirt were gone. She wore a dress of pristine white buckskin, and a necklace of raw turquoise hung at her throat. She rode a painted mare, and even from this distance her posture was regal. She rode down to the valley floor and stopped beside the old warrior. She looked at Silas. You give water, she said. Her English was broken but strong. I did, Silas replied. You not know who I am? I knew you were thirsty, Silas said. That was enough. She translated this for the old man. The warrior listened, his face as unmoving as stone. My father says you are brave or you are a fool, she said. I am Talia. He is Iron Hand. He is the chief of all you see. Silas felt a chill run down his spine. Iron Hand was a legend. The army said he was a ghost who couldn't be killed. Why are you here? Silas asked, his voice steady despite his fear. To see, Talia said, to see if you run, to see if you ride to the town of the white men and bring the blue coats. We waited. 3 days we watched you. And if I try to leave now? She didn't answer. She just looked at the 300 warriors on the hills. The answer was in their silence. You stay, she said. We watch. And so began the siege. For 3 days and 3 nights, Silas lived in a glass jar. He went about his work, feeding the horses, fixing the fences, chopping wood. He felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on his back. At night, their campfires dotted the hills like fallen stars, a constant reminder that his life hung by a thread. On the 4th day, the dust rose in the south. It wasn't the light step of unshod ponies. It was the heavy, rhythmic thud of iron shoes and carriage wheels. Talia came down the slope at a gallop. Men come, she said, pulling her horse up inches from Silas. Many men, big guns. Silas looked south. He saw the glint of metal in the sun. Soldiers? Hunters, she spat the word with disgust. Led by a bad man, Major Holloway. He kills women, he kills children. He wants my father's head. Silas knew the name. Holloway. A man discharged from the army for excessive cruelty, now leading a mercenary militia, a butcher in a uniform. They will find you here, Silas said. If they find us, this valley will turn red, Talia said. They will burn your house. They will kill you for standing near us. She looked deep into his eyes. You can tell them where we are. They will give you gold. Silas looked at the woman. Then he looked at the oncoming dust cloud. Go to the hills, Silas said quickly. Hide in the ravines behind the west ridge. I will handle them. Talia studied him for a second, an eternity. Then she wheeled her horse around and shouted a command. Like smoke dissipating in the wind, the 300 warriors vanished. They melted into the rock and scrub. In minutes, the valley looked empty, save for Silas and his lonely ranch. Major Holloway arrived 10 minutes later. There were 40 of them, armed to the teeth, dragging a Gatling gun on a wagon. Holloway was a large man with a waxed mustache and shark's eyes. He stopped his horse at the porch. Kincaid, Holloway greeted, his voice oily. We saw smoke. We saw tracks. Indian tracks. I burned brush, Major, Silas said, leaning on a broom, his heart hammering against his ribs. And cattle make plenty of tracks. Holloway dismounted. He walked up to Silas, his spurs jingling. He smelled of cheap whiskey and old gunpowder. Don't play games with me, rancher. We are tracking Iron Hand. We know he came through here. A scout swore he saw horses on your ridges. They passed through, Silas lied, keeping his voice flat. 2 days ago. They headed north toward Black Canyon. Holloway narrowed his eyes. He looked at the ground, where the Comanche horses had churned the earth minutes before. North, is it? Holloway smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Funny. The dirt here looks fresh. The wind moves the dust fast in this valley, Silas countered. Holloway walked to the water pump. He took a drink, his eyes scanning the silent hills. The silence was absolute. Not a bird sang. "You know what we do to Indian lovers, Kincaid?" Holloway whispered, wiping his mouth. "We skin them alive. I don't love anyone but my own peace, Major. If you want to go north, go. If you want to stay here wasting time, stay. But my hospitality is done." Holloway stared at him. The Major's hand hovered over his revolver. His men cocked their rifles. The sound was deafening in the quiet. Then Holloway laughed. "North. All right, we'll check the north. But if you're lying, Kincaid, I will come back, and I will bring fire." They rode out, kicking up a cloud of yellow dust, chasing the ghost Silas had invented. Silas waited until the dust settled. His legs were shaking. He sat down heavily on the porch steps. A shadow fell over him. Iron Hand was there. He had made no sound. Talia was beside him. The old chief looked at the direction Holloway had gone, then looked down at Silas. He untied something from his belt. It was an armband made of beaten silver and buffalo hide, engraved with the symbol of a howling wolf. He held it out to Silas. "The white man sells his brother for coins," Iron Hand said, his voice deep as thunder. "You sold your safety for strangers. You are no longer white. You are Wolf Brother." Silas took the armband. It was heavy. "Holloway will return," Silas said. "He isn't stupid. He will realize the tracks don't go north." "We know," Talia said softly, "and we will be ready." Holloway came back 2 nights later, and he didn't come to talk. Silas woke to the sound of shattering glass. A bottle of kerosene hit the side wall of the cabin. The fire roared up instantly, devouring the dry timber like paper. "Come out, rats!" Holloway's voice echoed in the darkness. Silas rolled out of his cot, coughing in the acrid smoke. He grabbed his rifle and his ammo box. Bullets began to rip through the walls, buzzing like angry wasps. The Gatling gun opened up outside, a mechanical stutter that shredded the front porch into splinters. Silas crawled to the back window. The barn was already burning. His horses were screaming in panic. "They have the house surrounded," Silas thought. He kicked the back door open and ran for the cover of the rocks behind the house. A bullet slammed into his thigh. Silas grunted, hitting the dirt hard. The pain was a lance of white-hot fire. He dragged himself behind a large boulder while bullets ricocheted around him, whining off the stone. "I see him!" one of Holloway's men shouted. "He's in the rocks!" Holloway laughed from the darkness. "Burn him out! Throw the dynamite!" Silas checked his rifle. 5 rounds. He was bleeding, cornered, and alone against 40 men and a machine gun. He looked down at his left arm. The silver armband glinted in the firelight. "At least I tried," he whispered. A man ran toward him, a stick of dynamite sparking in his hand. Silas aimed, fired. The man dropped, but 3 more advanced, and then the sky split open. It wasn't thunder. It was a war cry, a sound so terrifying, so primal, that it made Holloway's blood freeze. From the top of the cliffs, burning torches were thrown down, spinning through the air like meteors. And behind the torches came the riders. They descended the near-vertical slopes, defying gravity. Iron Hand led the charge, his black stallion leaping over the militia's barricades. It wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. The Comanches struck with the fury of a dam breaking. The Gatling gun fired wildly into the sky before Talia, riding her painted mare, swept past it and took the gunner down with a single swing of her club. Silas watched, dazed by blood loss, as the battle swirled around him. The firelight cast long, dancing shadows. He saw Holloway trying to mount his horse to flee, abandoning his men. Silas raised his rifle. His vision was blurring. He took a deep breath, ignoring the agony in his leg, and lined up the sights. Crack! The shot hit Holloway's horse, dropping the major into the mud. Holloway scrambled up, covered in filth, pulling his revolver. But before he could aim, a shadow engulfed him. Iron Hand dismounted. he held no gun. He held an ancient stone tomahawk. Holloway screamed, firing his revolver wildly, missing the chief. Iron Hand advanced, impassive, relentless. With one fluid motion, he disarmed the major and threw him to the earth. The rest of the militia scattered, fleeing into the darkness, hunted by the shadows that pursued them. The rain began to fall as the fighting died down. A heavy desert rain that hissed on the embers of what used to be Silas's home. Silas was leaning against the rock, his leg bound with a strip of his shirt. Talia was kneeling beside him, checking the wound. "The bullet passed through," she said. "It will hurt, but you will walk." Iron Hand approached. He looked at the smoking ruins of the ranch. Everything Silas owned was destroyed. The cattle scattered, the house reduced to ash and a lonely stone chimney. "Your life here is done, wolf brother," the chief said. "More men will come. The army will come." Silas looked at the ashes. Strangely, he felt no grief. This ranch had been a hiding place, not a home. "Where do I go?" Silas asked, his voice rough. Iron Hand pointed west toward the dark, jagged mountains that cut the horizon against the moon. "Where the wind is born," the chief said. "We go to the high places, where the wagons cannot follow. You come with us. You ride with us." Silas looked at Talia. She held out a hand to help him up. "It is a hard life," she said. "Cold in the winter, hungry sometimes, always hunted." Silas took her hand and pulled himself up, putting his weight on his good leg. He touched the silver armband. "Better to be a hunted wolf than a dog on a leash," Silas said. They brought him a Mustang, wild and strong. Silas mounted with difficulty, but once in the saddle the pain seemed to dull. They rode out under the rain, a long line of warriors ascending the narrow mountain trail. Silas Kincaid did not look back. The man who had built fences and dug wells died that night, burned along with his cabin. The man who rode up the mountain was something new, something forged in fire and baptized in blood. He disappeared into the legend, becoming a story whispered around campfires across the West. The story of the white giant who rode beside Iron Hand, guarding the ancient canyons, ensuring that in these wild lands, justice was as unforgiving as the desert sun.